Welcome to Life in the Bricks podcast, where we talk to real people about programs that enhance our community so that we can build bigger and better portfolios while providing options for our residents to achieve self-sufficiency. I'm your host, Tony McGinnis, Executive Director, CEO with the Huntsville Housing Authority. All right. Welcome to Life in the Bricks podcast, where we talk to real people about real issues and solutions that affect affordable housing. Today, I'm so excited to have Amon Martin with us. He's been a friend of the Housing Authority, and I'm excited to learn more about him today and his new venture with Radiant Development Partners. Is that right, Amon? Radiant Development Partners. And so we're looking forward to really diving into. I mean, this is gentleman I have a great deal of respect for when it comes to the development industry. He shared a lot of input with me when I first got into this back into the Housing Authority, and shared some great nuggets. And I'm sure there's going to be a very interesting conversation today. So, Amon, welcome to Life in the Bricks podcast. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Tony. Glad to be here.
So, Amon, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
Yeah. Let me tell you. So, a little bit about myself. I am a Southerner, true in heart, from a little town in South Carolina called Seneca, South Carolina. I have to tell people it's near Clemson University, and I have lived in a number of different places, and currently in Atlanta, Georgia. And as Tony said, just been happy. Currently, I am with Penrose Properties, LLC, and Penrose is an affordable housing and multifamily developer based out of Philadelphia. I run our Southeast development operations out of Atlanta, and we were very fortunate to partner with the Huntsville Housing Authority and Tony and his team to do two great projects in Huntsville. Some affordable senior housing, and let me say, Tony, just love working with you and looking forward to working with you more. I tell you a little bit more, but I've been in this affordable housing space. For gosh, it's crazy, Tony. It's been 24 years. Can you imagine that? And I've seen a lot and learned a lot. And then let me just say this, still learning. Happy to be here today to talk to you about anything you want to know about that I can hopefully answer about affordable housing.
Awesome, man. 24 years. 24 years in this industry is a long time. What did you do prior to getting into affordable housing?
Great question. It's going to blow your mind. Nothing even related. I was in the Air Force, Tony. So when I left Seneca, I went far away to school at the United States Air Force Academy. And it was actually after that I was commissioned a second lieutenant and fortunate enough to go to grad school. And I tell you all that to say, met one of my professors there, was in this affordable housing space. She became my favorite professor. We stayed friends after graduation. Of course, I owed from the service, the Air Force, my time in service, and decided to separate from the Air Force as a captain. And I'd stayed in touch with Jacqueline Rogers, my professor, and said, hey, I'm ready to get out, trying to figure out something to do. And she was like, you need to be an affordable housing developer. And the rest is history. She introduced me to a firm in Baltimore where I really cut my teeth on affordable housing. And then let me tell you, Tony, I really knew nothing about, didn't know anything about real estate other than I had bought a house. But what really attracted me to housing and real estate development is, Tony, as you know, really it touches every discipline there is, from legal, financing, architecture, construction, community engagement. And when you add affordable housing, what I like to think of that as community development, Tony, it really adds that the public policy engagement piece even tenfold. So I'm one of those, I tell people I'm a master of I know a little bit about a lot of things. I like, touching all of these disciplines and really touching the people in community, uplifting communities. So decided that that's what I wanted to do, and then been running ever since.
Oh man, that's awesome. First of all, thank you for your service. We appreciate that. I wanted to ask you this question. You know, you say you've been involved over 24 years. You know, you got involved right after service. What are some of the things that you've seen that have changed over the years in this industry?
Great question. A lot. So let me think about where to begin. You know, the just, you know, affordable, to develop affordable housing, it takes, you know, incentives, it takes partnerships. Let me just say that, like our partnership, Tony, because we have to access incentives to make, as we like to say in the forum, make the numbers work. Because as you know, Tony, what we're building is not the affordable housing of yesterday, what people think of. It's high, extremely high quality stuff. So to do that, it takes a lot of partners and a lot of support, both financial and political support to make it happen. So I would say one of the biggest changes is just with these incentives, we'll call it, some of them financial, you know, there's been lots of, you know, requirements just add up. So you know, I've noticed a lot of compliance and other requirements versus 24 years ago. You know, I like to say the manual used to be this thick, now it's this thick. That's one change. But I like to stay positive. And one of the biggest changes I've seen is related to NIMBYism. And Tony, you know what that is, but for your guests, that's an acronym for not in my backyard. You know, when people hear affordable housing, they think the worst. And they think it's going to bring high crime. It's going to bring, you know, the security issues. It's going to, you know, it's reduce my property values. I mean, these are some of the negative stigmas that are untrue. You know, perception is not reality, especially with today's affordable housing. So one of the things that I've seen in 24 years is change, and this is a positive thing, but the cause of the change is that the picture of who needs affordable housing, I think people realize it is everyday people. It is the people out there, our fire men and women, our police officers, our teachers, our city employees. I mean, the face of who needs affordable housing has changed. And I think people, communities see that, wait a minute, the affordable, you know, my mail, the person that delivers my mail can't afford to live in my neighborhood, can't afford to live in my city, right? Tony, you know this. And what that has done is it's made it that NIMBYism or that fear of affordable housing less. So it's made that's one thing. I like to just try to stay positive, Tony. As you know, in our business, this is the Lord's work and it gets tough. But one of the positive things is it's been, I see when I'm engaging communities, when I'm working with cities and local jurisdictions, now instead of you know, them being apprehensive about affordable housing or just outright, we don't want it. I mean, now we're seeing, Tony, and you see this in your city, like the great event you had Monday. People are saying we need affordable, we need workforce housing, we need this type of housing, because I think what we're seeing is, you know, we all, if you look back 100 years ago, all of our communities were mixed income naturally, right? And we're seeing the need, not having that diversity of income, not having your school teachers and police officers, you know, they having to drive an hour away, or healthcare professionals. I think we saw during COVID, healthcare professionals are the true frontliners, right? They're the one, you know, they have to live an hour away. They can't afford to live in the city. So I would say that's one change I've seen, that's unfortunately, but fortunately that people see the need and understand the need. It makes our job easier.
You know, you brought up a very positive point, trying to stay positive. But my next question is, what are some of the stereotypes or the stigmas that you most commonly have to address when you tell people you're in the affordable housing space or development space, but you also are doing affordable housing? What are some of the stigmas that you most commonly have to address in the community?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it is everything ranging from, we don't want those people living here. I think we all know what that is a dog whistle for. Two, it's going to lower the fear of lowering my property values, safety, security issues. And let me just say, I mean, these are all real issues and not so different than even if it was a market rate development or someone wanting to build a retail strip or a shopping mall. I mean, number one, I mean, I understand when you're going into a community, change always, is difficult. But unfortunately, in our world, when you hear affordable housing, the worst sometimes people go to the worst stigmas, and those are some of those I named. Not the security, safety, crime, and poor quality housing is what they instantly think. And one of the ways we deal with that, Tony, is we show them, say what you're going to do, what you say, and say what you do. Right. And show them this is not the affordable housing of yesterday. This is, I would argue, higher quality housing than some of the market rate that's being built. We may not have all of the bells and whistles, meaning amenities, meaning rooftop swimming pools and et cetera, but we are building our affordable housing for the long term, meaning we're there for the long term as an owner of the property. And so we are building high quality, right? It may not have rooftop swimming pools, right? But we've got the highest of quality because we want this housing to provide quality housing for the residents living there and that the community, the neighborhood can be proud of for the long term.
Man, that's powerful. So you've been doing this all over the country for 24 years. You've seen a lot of things. It's changed, the stigma. This question right here is, do you feel like, I mean, we've talked about it, but how short are we when it comes to affordable housing units? Is there a need for more? What do we, where do you think we stand across the country as it relates to affordable units?
Yeah. I mean, again, I can't give you a number, but I can definitely tell you we're short. I think if you go to and it's not an urban, rural thing, I think it's everywhere. Because you go to rural areas, land is cheaper. You may have more land to develop, but then you may have housing there that's naturally affordable, but it's not quality housing where you and I, when I think about quality, I'm like, would you want to live there? Would you want your mother to live there, your father to live there? So it's a rural urban problem. I'm not aware of any city that I'm working in that doesn't have a need, because as I said, and it's from the top of the leadership down, I think people are seeing, and more importantly, businesses are seeing. If I could tell you every other day, I'm talking to employers, be they hospitals, be they restaurants, that are saying, wow, I was talking to a retail developer the other day. They have a client that has a number of restaurants throughout the city. They can't find workers because they can't find housing near. I mean, one of the biggest recruiting mechanisms for businesses is affordable housing, because their workforce can't afford to live close to where they work. And Tony, that's what we all want to do, right? You want to be able to live, work, and play in a convenient, close by. You don't want to have to drive an hour each way to work. So, that's why I know. I mean, it's one of those intuitive, Tony, I can't point you to a study. There are studies there, but I can tell you there is a shortage and a need. When you got business owners telling, which never, I can tell you that 20 years ago, I would never hear that. You got business that we need some workforce housing. We need housing for our employees. The short answer is it's not enough.
Yeah, we look at Huntsville. There's been anywhere from 16 to 20,000 units built over the last 3-4 years, and not one is affordable that has been constructed, other than the ones that we partner with. But when you start thinking about all those units coming into cities all across the country, what kind of legislation needs to be incorporated into some of these cities? We talked to some city planners and city councilmen about inclusionary zoning, trying to do something to put some kind of incentive in place so that when developers come into the community, they, we incentivize them for at least a portion of the units that they build so that we can really start to identify more for those individuals. Because I truly believe if we can deconcentrate poverty, then we'll start to see a greater return on those investors who come into the community, because now we have other sites and other lands. So is there any legislation that you feel like we could incorporate to get more housing?
Yeah. And you said that the first inclusionary zoning is one, Tony, and we have that here in Atlanta, and that helps, but that's just one of the tools in the toolbox. And again, the challenge with that is, when you're forcing developers to develop, what I would say is it's a carrot and a stick, right? You want to not just say because it's expensive. Because at the end of the day, on the market, we'll say the market rate conventional side, they're putting private debt and equity on this. So by forcing a developer to do affordable units, generating less revenue, it makes it harder for the numbers to work. So what I would say to go along with the inclusionary zoning is incentives for property owners or developers, meaning, waiving permit fees, tax abatement and real estate tax abatement, real estate exemption to go along with the inclusionary zoning to help the developer offset that loss in revenue by the affordable units. But there is no better I would say, incentive than money to help us fund, to fund these affordable units. And again, with just to keep in mind, we're building highest quality we can. This is, so we need that help to keep the rents affordable. But I want to take it another direction that our political leaders can do that I think is easier, low-hanging fruit than the change in legislation, is to champion affordable and workforce housing. When the leadership in your city, in your community, are champions and acknowledging we need to house our workforce, when that there goes a long way to have that support. Because Tony, to bring it back to one of your earlier questions, opposition, when you're going into, let's say we may have a site, but we've got to rezone the site. You have a lot of times communities come out in opposition, but to have that city council representative, that mayor, that stand up with the developer and say, this is what, because that's who the community trusts, right? It's their elected officials. So that helps us with that not in my backyard NIMBYism. And you would be, so that is worth its weight in gold, having the local jurisdiction's leadership champion. And second, public land. I mean, I tell people every day, they like, what do you need? We want some workforce and we want some affordable housing. What do you need? Well, I need land, right? I need incentive to help me because what I want to build for you is high quality, but I need land. Public land. I mean, being one of the initiatives here in Atlanta that Mayor Dickens is doing. It's funny when you said the 20,000 units that have been built in Huntsville. Well, Mayor Dickens has a goal by 2028 to have 20,000 units either preserved or new units built in the city of Atlanta. And one of the things he's doing here with his land, he is a champion. He is a great example of championing it from the top. He has he's pulled out and said, brought everybody, all the public entities to the table in the city and county. Where's your public land? Mm-hmm. Where's your surplus land? That's great. And they are starting to try to repurpose this land. Where it makes sense, right? Some of it may not make sense, but to repurpose that land for affordable and workforce housing, to put, to contribute this land in a number or structure to make the numbers work so that we can build a capital stack to build high quality affordable housing. So those are maybe not a direct answer to legislation, but I always like to put that plug. Having your political leadership champion affordable housing, it goes a tremendous to help meet this need and address this problem.
So the community has a responsibility as well. What can the community do to create more opportunities, public-private partnerships? What are some of the things that you feel like the community could do? And you mentioned, finding out where that land is, the access land, but what are some of the things the community can do to create more housing opportunities?
Yeah, well, I would think from a community, Tony, my thought would be, have an open mind. Okay, because the community, the community, like if any, for us, especially when we're going through, we find a site and we're going through rezoning, as you know, Tony, that's a public process. Or I'm engaging a community, trying to identify a site for affordable housing. The biggest thing I would say, Tony, is asking you have an open mind. Again, we all enter a room, we enter a space with our biases that we have. Try to put those aside, have an open mind, and then understand and look when you're, just thinking about, when you're going to that restaurant or your children, just think about where the people who are providing services in your community to stop and think, where do they live? Shouldn't they have an opportunity to live close to work, to take advantage of a lot of the amenities that other community members do, who may be fortunate enough to have higher incomes and be able to afford to live there. So I'd say the biggest thing would be open-minded to, accept, think about, and support affordable housing. And then I would say that, then going back to the political leadership, put pressure, speak to your city council rep, to let them know you're open support of affordable housing.
So the community's role, man, is so key. I think about you keep mentioning having a place for, essential, I want to say essential, non-essential workers to live.
Yeah.
We live in a city where, it's so important because transportation, if your transportation systems aren't as strong, if your schools are not as strong, you got to have affordable housing in areas that are desirable, but you also want to be in areas where the common folks can live as well. We got in this thing where we really struggle with the have and the have nots. But as I think about how everything that we're doing is starting to unfold, well, if people can't afford to get to the restaurants, the hospitals, the different places because they can't afford to live near it, then how does that affect these businesses? And so affordable housing not only helps with job growth and development, but I feel like it's an economic development piece that we oftentimes overlook.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Tony. And no, I absolutely agree. And it's one of those, what I call, not necessarily, it's something not necessarily, maybe it's quantitative, it's a qualitative thing, and whenever you're talking about qualitative, it's harder to measure and put a metric beside it. But you're right, when I think of it this way, quality of life infrastructure, you sometimes heard social determinants of health, it's access to affordable health care, access to jobs, which you just said, access to public transportation, and then quality housing. And all of these things, when you think about what makes a community sustainable, great, it's having all of that, and I think about, I talked about crime earlier. Man, I'm a proponent. When somebody has something to lose, they don't go commit crimes. When they have a nice roof over their head, they have a safe place to go to, they're healthy, they have access to health, because it's all of these things going on. They have a good paying with a job with a livable wage. I mean, these things, make people happy, and they're less likely. When you have something to lose, you don't want to lose it. So I think and then I just think I am a believer, Tony, in mixed, putting diversity. Diversity is what breeds excellence, new ideas, innovation. And I think putting all rich people together and all poor people over here just doesn't make for a great society, because then you get the divisiveness and what we're seeing in our country today. And it's because people are separated. I don't want to use the word segregated. Separated. When people come together And that's what we try to do. Tony, you know this. We want to do where you were leading. We want to do mixed income. We want to do housing. We don't want to put all the affordable housing in this part of the city and nothing over here. Because I just believe, call me naive, call me whatever. I believe when you put people together, because then you learn, wait a minute, Tony and I are not so much different. Once you were living, you're walking to the mailbox together, you start engaging and talking, you're like, we're not so different. I just think it makes for getting that close to that great society. So,
man, that's great to hear because we're about to engage in a big project here in the city, Mill Creek implementation, and that's exactly what we're going to do: is create a mixed income neighborhood where people can live together. And from a kid who's coming from public housing, who lived in public housing, I can imagine the impact of having someone who got up every day to go to work, who may not have been from public housing, but chose to live in my neighborhood because they could afford it. And, this person happens to be a lawyer or a doctor. The impact that would have on me as a young person who's growing up in this neighborhood where oftentimes all we see is the people who are just like us. So I think what you're talking about, the mixed income element, is so important because our children need to see more. They need to see different. They need to see that they can become whoever they choose to become, and to have those examples right there in their neighborhood, man, that's so important.
And you hit it on the head. Seeing that as a young man, seeing that man or that woman get up every day who's an accountant, an engineer. I mean, it just puts you and they're living near you. You stop to think. You don't, it's a mindset. You don't think, I'm poor. I'm living in poor house. No, you thinking, I'm going to be like Tony, right? And I'll say, that's, you asked me earlier, one of the passions got me, and I'll say, Tony, I know your story. In a lot of ways, we're different. You grew up in public housing, and I'll say it. I grew up, yes, a black man in South, upper middle class. I was third generation college on my father's side. I had always had a roof over a safe housing. I always had a hot meal. And in my family, it wasn't, what are you graduating from high school? It's what are you doing after? We know you're graduating, but what are you doing? So that expectation, I was surrounded by men and women who were, to your point, doing things. And that's the only difference between me and someone who doesn't grow up. Not that I was any smarter, Tony, right? It's just I was fortunate and blessed to grow up in this environment, to have I had health care, I didn't ever have to worry about fresh food, and that's the only difference, my environment. So I'm with you, Tony. That is why I'm so passionate about this. And I think it's so important.
So let me ask you this question. When we think about, and we're going to wrap it up with this, but what are some of the success stories or one or two success stories that you can share with us on a project that it started out right, ended right, and that you're kind of proud of? Some of the things that you've done over your career. What are some of the?
Well, let me tell you two things. I'm going to tell you two stories. Well, one quick thing: the best compliment you can give an affordable workforce. You said something. That's one of the things that's changed terminology, right? Because you said essential employee. COVID really opened up. Those essential employees that had to get up and go to work every day, those were affordable. We know that, right, Tony? So one of the best examples I mentioned earlier, you could give an affordable housing or call me with attainable housing, workforce housing developer. This is the best compliment you can give me, Tony. You know what that is? After I complete a project, right? It's fully leased up, stabilized, occupied. And I'm bragging, I'm telling someone about it. And they're like, Amon, you're lying. That ain't affordable housing, right? That is the best compliment. you can get. And I've been fortunate to work on projects that people don't even know. They're mixed. Don't even. I had one. It was funny. One resident that was living at one of my projects. And met her through another friend. And this was mixed income. So there's tiers of income. I mean, there were this was a Hope 6 project. There were public housing units mixed in with market rates. It's like the airplane theory. You may pay $300 for your ticket sitting next to someone who paid $50. You don't know it, right? And this person, she argued me down that there were no public housing residents. How dare I claim she lived in it? And I was like, ma'am, thank you very much, right? Best compliment you can give. Second story really relates to that NIMBYism, Tony, in the community opposition. And I learned this probably 20 years ago. I've been doing this for 24 or 20 years ago. And I was working in a community. This was up north. It was a blue collar community. And we were developing about 125 units of multi-family apartments, and right adjacent to a townhome community maybe it was not even 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And I would call these, first-time home buyers, right? And boy, this community, there was a neighborhood association. They were up at every first community meeting, 100 people in the room. Oh, we don't want those. We don't want that housing. We don't want that housing. And I mean, I walked out of there with all kinds of stuff thrown at me. And, I thought about it. I went back to my office, Tony, and I said, wait, let me look up what one of these, went online, what they're what they saw. I looked at the value, backed into a mortgage payment. And you know what, Tony? It wasn't that much higher than the rents. I mean, it was, because we all know home ownership, one of the biggest challenges is that down payment, right? Mm-hmm. But the monthly payment, I mean, it was more than the rent, but it wasn't substantially more, which gave me the thought, you know what, the people here are they're not that different than the people who are going to be living in our apartments. Difference is they just can't, they need that step, that middle housing to save up, and where can they live? Where they're only paying 30% of their gross income towards rent versus, as you know, Tony, there are households that may have to pay 50, 60% of their income to live in quality housing. So that this would give them an opportunity to save and then maybe one day buy one of those townhouses from one of those owners. So what I did, Tony, I went and I built because you want to put a face on who's going to be living there. Mm-hmm. And I made a board. I called the Chamber of Commerce, got salaries for police officers, teachers, healthcare professionals, public safety workers, built a bulletin board like I was in the 5th grade, and went and cut out magazine, firemen, put it there, got the salary data from the Chamber of Commerce, went back to that meeting the next day. They were waiting for me, Tony. And I said, you know what? Let's talk about who's going to be living here. Put up that board, man, and this is the key, Tony. I've been doing this for 24 years. I don't care what you're developing. You have opposition, you are always I don't care what if you're building a park, you're building a hotel, whatever it is, you're going to get opposition, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to always get, I like to say, 3 to 4 people. It doesn't matter what they're going to oppose it. Well, and so everybody did, but the room kind of got quiet. It wasn't as loud, Tony, when I started talking about who's going to live. But these 4 neighbors, I don't want those people there. I don't want them. And all of a sudden, Tony, a woman stood up and said, how dare you? I am that certified nursing assistant, that lab technician. How dare you? And Tony, the whole room changed instantly. Once they realized, wait a minute, right? These are our people. These are us. And it was just one of those epiphany moments, man, I had in my career. And I tell you, I do that now, and it taught me a great lesson and something. But it turned the whole room, and everyone all of a sudden went, whoa. This is what it is. So that it was just, now I don't know how funny a story that is, but that was an important story kind of in my growth as housing development.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, man, this has been rich. We've already reached our time, man. It's just time just
I told you South Carolina, Tony. We talk, man.
Man, it flew by, and man, I'm grateful to have you on. I appreciate you joining us. Please do all you can to post this, and we'll post it on all your social media outlets. We look forward to doing more work with you here in the city of Huntsville, man. You've been a great partner to us, and couldn't think of anybody better to be on the show at this time other than you, man. And again, wish you all the success in this space. And anything else you'd like to share with us before we close out?
Absolutely, Tony. I wanted to thank you. Take this time. I talked about leadership. Thank you for being a leader and an advocate, Tony, because it takes leaders like you. And I know you're out there fighting the Lord's fight, man, and continue to fight. I appreciate it. Bringing people together like you did Monday. Put us all in the room, lock us in, and don't let us out till we figure it out, Tony, okay? Because this is going to make Huntsville, the communities, the neighborhoods better. So thank you for what you do, man, and keep it up. All right? And I look forward to working with you a lot more.
Awesome, man. We appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you again for being here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another great episode of Life in the Bricks, man. I hope you are full of information today. I want to thank Amon again for all of his knowledge and appreciate him for being here. Share this on all your social media platforms. The word needs to get out. We need affordable housing. Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony.
We've come to the end of the podcast today. Please share the link on all your social media platforms. We hope that you all will join us again next time. Until then, keep serving and keep pushing. This has been another amazing episode of Life in the Bricks podcast. Peace.